So thank you for the introduction, and I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizing committee, particularly T2M and Academy of Mobility Humanities, and with specific reference to Dr. Insioption, if I'm pronouncing it right, and then Dr. Jinyang Lee and Mingi Park, whom I have not been able to meet. And I think Mingi Park was the one who was constantly in touch with me, sending me emails. So any staff member that I would be able to meet, I was asking about Mingi Park. So wherever you are, Mingi Park, thank you so much. And for this meticulous efforts in extending this invitation, coordinating my travel, and making arrangements, ensuring my comfortable stay here. As you all know by now, my name is Sireesha Telugu, and I teach in the Department of English, University of Hyderabad in India. Participating in this event has been profoundly enlightening, meeting esteemed scholars from across the globe and engaging in informative discussions over the past few days has been truly enriching experience. Throughout the conference, the presentations that I was able to witness and hear have challenged the traditional lineage of mobility studies, delving into a multitude of topics and themes beneath the expansive umbrella of mobility humanities. This exploration has created a fresh mobility paradigm firmly grounded in the social sciences and transport histories. The speakers have diligently mapped out the interconnections between mobility discourse and artistic and humanistic discussions. Our explorations, again, over the 2 days, have spanned works deeply rooted in process philosophy and post-colonial perspectives, as well as analysis of transport history and artistic representations of movements. Beyond the confines of traditional historical, anthropological, and sociological studies, the exploration of human migration and mobility unveils a groundbreaking transformation. Migration studies are crucial for deciphering the intricate motivations driving human movement, unraveling the consequences of mobility, and delving into the complex process of social integration among migrants in their adopted communities. As a scholar trained in humanities and engaged in migration studies, I am drawn to exploring the profound concept of migration, which stands as a fundamental element within the domain of mobility studies. I firmly assert that migration is an enduring event that unfolds within the necessities of beyond the national borders, manifesting a distinct form of geographical or spatial mobility that makes a change in place or residence. So this intricate phenomenon embodies the essence of mobility, albeit frequently accompanied by many societal labels and implications. As I've been saying in the last 2 days, my academic pursuit is dedicated to unwinding the complexities of migration, exploring its multifaceted dimensions. I particularly in this talk would focus on understanding migration through the lens of refugee writings and repatriate testimonials. Through these narratives, I aim to discern the intricate interconnections that migration shares with the broader discourse of mobility studies, and in doing so, I seek to contribute to a nuanced understanding of human mobility and its profound impact on individuals and societies. So when I talk about mobility, when I talk about mobility studies, there are some crucial questions that concern the study of refugees and repatriates. What constitutes political and social displacements? What psychological impact does displacement have on the minds of those affected? How do displaced individuals redefine their identities in a newly settled land or location? How do the aesthetics of displacement intersect with the ethics of migration policies? So these are some of the questions that I would like to address today. And this inquiries will be thoroughly done, I hope so, by exploring the nuances with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant terminology. So by delving into these questions, I work toward untangling the intricate layers of displacement, shedding light on its profound psychological implications and broader ethical and aesthetic dimensions within the context of migration politics. So, to begin with, I would like to talk about the refugees and the repatriates. All right. So, what do we understand by the term refugees? Who are refugees and how do they differ from repatriates? In contemporary times, the term refugee and migrant are often used interchangeably in discussions. However, it is crucial to recognize that these two terms have distinct legal definitions. A refugee is an individual who seeks refuge in another country due to persecution, violence, war in their homeland. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which is called as UNHCR, maintains a clear distinction between refugees and migrants to preserve clarity about the causes and nature of refugee movements and to uphold the social specific obligations owed to refugees under international law. So according to the UNHCR data for 2022, I have the statistics on the PPT now. The global number of refugees has surpassed 35.3 million, and the count of forcibly displaced individuals worldwide due to persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights violations has exceeded 108.4 million. This alarming statistic highlights that 1.2% of the global population has been compelled to leave their homes. Among those affected are 5.4 million asylum seekers, 62.5 million internally displaced people, and 5.2 million individuals needing protection. This surge in numbers reflects the harsh reality of the modern world, where millions continue to grapple with losing their homes, sense of belonging, and identity. Ideally, many refugees hope to return to their homeland, but this aspiration is only sometimes attainable. So the repatriates, the one who returns home, are called as the repatriates, who return to their country of origin, encounter numerous formidable challenges for various reasons. These challenges include feelings of estrangement, hostility, a pervasive sense of helplessness, enduring confusion, and the difficult task of assimilating into society while striving to rebuild a home they or their ancestors have abandoned many generations ago. In the words of Helen Taylor, refugees and repatriates are, I quote, in the crudest way defined by the loss of home, unquote. Therefore, it is profoundly significant to address the refugee-repatriate crisis and to acknowledge their experiences crucially linked with displacement. A defining feature of migration, whether we talk about the voluntary migration or a forced migration, is displacement. For some, displacement is political, entwined with violent processes or state formation, such as partition, militarization. For others, it is ecological, caused by droughts, hurricanes, or environmental degradations. The aesthetics of migration and trauma are persistent themes in the uprooted diaspora. The concept of trauma in displacement finds its intersection with humanities through different forms, literary narratives, cultural expressions, ethical considerations, and advocacy endeavors. An epistemological and political exploration of human mobility offers a moral perspective, enriching our understanding of displacement and resettlement. In this context, I examined two significant displacements following the partition of British India. Firstly, the cross-migration of Indians into the newly divided two nation states, India and Pakistan. And secondly, the repatriation of Burmese Indians to independent India. While partition narratives delve into the trauma of relocation, the stories of repatriates reflect their fear of social exclusion from their homeland. The study explores the aesthetics of displacement, portraying the refugees in partition literature, and provides an ethnographic analysis of the experiences of Burmese Indian Repatriates. Additionally, it delves into the moral and ethical dimensions underlying identity construction within the diaspora context. Therefore, this is a small attempt, being amongst you, the highly noted speakers in the conference in all these days. It's a small attempt to serve as a discourse, as the aesthetic responses to displacement and the role of morality in the context of the partition of India and the repatriation of Burmese Indians. So in 1947, India achieved independence from British colonial rule, leading to the partition of the nation into two distinct countries. India, predominantly inhabited by Hindus. Hindus, as you all know, Hinduism is a religion, a dominant religion in India, and Pakistan, primarily populated by Muslims. While we will briefly delve into the intricate details of the events that led to partition, our significant focus today lies on its aftermath. Like many other Commonwealth countries, India experienced years of struggle under colonial rule, marked by fervent efforts for independence. The presence of the English in India initially began with trade, but eventually led to territorial acquisition following the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The imposition of heavy taxes and colonial administration triggered a widespread revolt in India, ending in the departure of the British and the subsequent grant of independence in 1947. As the British left the Indian subcontinent, they left two nearly formed nations through partition, grappling with immense challenges. The horrors of partition overshadowed the celebration of independence. Unfortunately, partition meant that millions of people found themselves on the wrong side of the border, leading to a wave of bloodshed. As you can see, notice that is how Indian subcontinent was divided into two parts. The green part is where we call the East Pakistan and the West Pakistan. And so we find that there is a double migration, double displacement that is involved in the partition of India. So as I said, people who have suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of the border, who suddenly found themselves uprooted, had to flee from their ancestral homes on foot, on bullock carts by train. 10 million refugees is what we call, and that is noted as the largest displacement in the history of India. And over the 2 days, again, I keep repeating this, reiterating over the 2 days, I have realized that this is where migration can be interlinked with transport studies, and see how vehicles stand as metaphoric representations to the notion of mobility. Repatriation of Burmese Indians took place in 1962. So on one hand, when we have the partition in 1947, aftermath of independence, we are talking about repatriation, again, aftermath of independence in 1962. But if we look into the history of Indians in Burma, it can be traced back to prehistoric times, notably through historical connections between the Indian coast and Burma known as Suvarna Bhumi. Suvarna Bhumi is roughly translated as golden land, dating back to centuries before the birth of Christ. Trade continued to be the major reason for migration between India and Burma until the indentured labor system was introduced. Indentured labor system was a replacement to the end of slave system in the 19th century. The British, under this system, transported the girmits. When we call girmits, we are basically addressing them as laborers to various European colonies like the Caribbean, Malaysia, Natal, Mauritius, Fiji, Sri Lanka, and Burma, and today's Myanmar. Though migration studies refer to the indentured labor and the mass movement of the people to the Caribbean and Fiji, it makes no mention in detail of the migration to the neighboring lands like British Malaya, Ceylon, and Rangoon. Like many other people, like many other migrants, economic hardships and the aspiration for better employment opportunities abroad instituted migration of these laborers from India. A significant wave of relocation occurred from the port of Madras, today's Chennai, Andhra Pradesh and Calcutta and today's Kolkata, leading to most migrating to Ceylon and Rangoon. An ethnographic study was conducted to hear to the experiences of the Burmese Indians who repatriated to India in 1962, who were living in the camps, converted colonies, and who were living amidst the kind of a disastrous situations. During interviews, respondents consistently highlighted that Indians who had previously migrated and settled in Burma assured them of a better quality of life and higher living standards compared to what India could offer. In one context, these laborers can be seen as refugees who chose to escape the persecution of caste and class in Indian society. According to an ethnographic study done by a sociologist named Satyanarayana, people who migrated as indentured laborers belonged to the lower caste and lower class, especially to Burma and Ceylon. These individuals experienced severe caste oppression and social exploitation in India, enduring low wages and being denied property ownership, which left them profoundly impoverished and disempowered. Migration became their sole escape from India's rigid class and caste structures. However, political changes in Burma led to the chaos of repatriation, leaving many homeless and poor. This upheaval profoundly affected the entire migrant community, resulting in the loss of everything, including their social political status in Burma. Consequently, mass repatriation of Indians from Burma occurred. Today, I briefly would delve into the aesthetics and ethics of displacement experienced by these two groups of migrants. This exploration is essential for gaining insights into the experiences of displaced individuals who were forced out of their homes for various reasons that I have mentioned earlier. Drawing from Heidegger's philosophy, I explored the aesthetic experiences of refugees and repatriates, examining how their journeys relate to the concept of art as something that emerges through the individual. Through an examination of the partition narratives, this study investigates how literature responds to the complex issues of a traumatic past. Partition literature helps us comprehend the complex and profound ways in which the themes are represented in exploring, again, the aesthetics and ethics of displacement. And I think this is the time where we can also connect to the other histories like the divide of North and Southern Korea. And probably the experiences might be similar to the kind of partition that India went through. And the partition of India, as I've already stated, was one of the most significant historical events of the 20th century. In the ferocious massacres, at least 2 million people lost their lives. Hundreds and thousands of children were abandoned. 75,000 women were raped, and 100,000 women were abducted from the families that were torn apart. Hannah Arendt, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, states that, I quote her, "What happened in Palestine was then repeated in India on a large scale involving many millions of people." Drawing from the distressing historical events, a significant body of literature has emerged, giving voice to the traumatic realities of partition, capturing the disillusionment and delving into the psychological trauma experienced. Works such as Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, Manju Kapoor's Difficult Daughter, Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man and Cracking India, Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan, and Saadat Hasan Manto's short story, among many others, vividly depict the enormity of emotional distress inflicted upon the people. These narratives resonate with the anguish of individuals forced to abandon their homes and relocate to unfamiliar lands, portraying the deep sorrow and dislocation tied to their religious beliefs and ideologies. Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan vividly captures the turbulent times of 1947 and underscores its enduring significance and relevance in today's world. The ethical principles that should have been the bedrock of religion have been meticulously erased. This fundamental absence illuminates the stark disparities that we have persisted through the ages. Singh's work unravels the intricate ways in which the politics of partition permeated people's consciousness, leading to the division of families along ideological lines and giving rise to profound fears and uncertainties. The novel exposes the complex dimensions of physical, emotional, and cultural trauma manifested through the horrors of killings, mass displacement, violence, bloodshed, pathetically, all in the name of religion. These themes resonate with the contemporary world, highlighting the importance of reflecting on the past to understand the present challenges. Similarly, Manto's short stories about partition are profoundly humane in their portrayal of harrowing events and recording their emotional impact. These narratives vividly convey the horror of the trauma induced by displacement. Nevertheless, their abruptness raises ethical concerns. In just a few pages, Manto captures the unsettling lives of his characters, creating powerful and impactful depictions. I would like to tell you a small short story from Manto, which is called as Open It. Manto, in this short story, vividly portrays the physical and psychological brutality, including the abduction of women, gendered violence, vulnerability experienced by women, horrific massacres in the context of displacement. This powerful narrative delves into the aesthetics of displacement, depicting a desperate and anguished father's frantic search for his daughter, who goes missing while being transported to refugee camps. So he implores the aid of rescuers. Rescuers are also called as Raskars. He meets 8 young men who are volunteering in the refugee camps, and he walks up to them and requests them to find his daughter. He grapples with the devastating uncertainties of the time and stands there requesting them. The narrative delves deep into human emotions, conveying the profound trauma, loss, and uncertainty experienced by those people who were uprooted. After a few days, the rescuers locate the missing daughter. Her name is Sakina. They extend their assistance, providing her with food and a jacket for protection, heightening the emotional resonance of the narrative. At this point, the readers are relieved to know that the girl has been found and she was provided some assistance. But the story unfolds into few days. After few days, the father reaches out to the rescuers and inquires about his missing daughter. They assure him that they will soon locate her. So they tell him, we will locate her very soon. And to a reader, this comes out unexpectedly, and it creates a suspicion in the reader's mind. On that very day, the father learns about a young girl receiving medical aid in the refugee camps. He rushes to see the girl and recognizes his daughter lying on the stretcher, resembling a lifeless form. His silence is abruptly shattered when the doctor walks into the room, gestures towards a window, and instructs the father, open it. Upon hearing this, the young girl, Sakina, who appeared lifeless, opens her waistband and lowers her pants. The father exclaims joyfully, my daughter is alive, while the doctor breaks into a cold sweat. We are all moved by the emotional pain when we understand that the young girl, Sakina, was raped by her own community members, perhaps many of them. How do morality, trust, and ethics manifest in this context? What political responsibility led to the partition? Reflecting on such atrocities during this period is challenging to comprehend. This reminds me of the Nirbhaya incident that I was trying to have a conversation with Carlos this morning that happened in Delhi of a 23-year-old woman who was brutally assaulted and raped in a moving bus. This is where I made a point this morning, trying to talk about the trauma and memory that is associated with transport studies. Writers such as Urvashi Butalia, Jisha Menon, and poets like Aga Shahid Ali and Faiz Ahmed Faiz often illuminate the trauma of partition in their works, offering profound insights into the emotional and psychological experiences of displaced individuals. These narratives humanize the expertise, nurturing empathy and understanding among readers. If you are looking at the context of the Burmese repatriates, in a similar fashion mentioned above, repatriation left an enduring impact on the identities of communities and families, a legacy that continues to affect lives even after 6 decades. When Burma's socialization and nationalization policies closed its door to Indians, thousands chose to repatriate to their homeland in 1962, unaware of the life that awaited them in India. The year 1962 saw the mass exodus of movement of the repatriates to India. Indian government did provide aid to these repatriates by assigning some ships to transport them to India. Some of them who could afford air service flew to Calcutta. In this historical context, a group of people, including my own family, undertook a journey that is a kind of a reminiscent of India's grand march during the Second World War, a theme that is explored by writers such as Amitav Ghosh and Hugh Tinker. Ghosh's work, Exodus from Burma, offers a vivid account of the experiences of those caught up in this disastrous repatriation. Unlike those who have traveled by ships and airways, there is a group of people who opted for the perilous route along the Indian-Burmese border to reach India. Strangely, this journey has been largely ignored and overlooked in migration histories, particularly within academic circles. And this morning, Professor Mom was making a point in discussing about migration, and he said he will be looking at migration history not through transport but by walk. And this is one such history that we have where none of the academics have made an attempt to look at these narratives. Like countless others, my family was part of this exhausting journey homeward. They vividly recall the traumatic experiences of being stranded on the roads, covering almost 700 miles to reach India. In their desperate circumstances, they were forced to leave the sick behind and even tie infants to trees, unable to carry them further. These untold stories of resilience and survival echo the painful legacy of repatriation, shedding light on the challenges faced by those who compelled to rebuild their lives in unfamiliar territories. Nevertheless, most of them returned to Burma and resumed their former lives. However, 1962, as I've already said, marked the onset of a significant wave of repatriation of the Burmese Indians. While some have preserved their stories through the tangible mementos they brought back to their homeland, others have assimilated their identities shaped by migration. Against this background, I have a personal experiences, and especially this is one such experience I would like to share in all the conferences that I visit, because people are quite curious to know about my family name. And this comes from my older generations who ventured to Burma as indentured laborers during the late 19th century and returned with an acquired identity, a heritage bestowed by upon the diaspora through the language they communicated. So we say they are the Telugu speaking people, Telugus, Tamils, Malayalis, Odiyas, Koreans. So in that way, this particular group of people who my family was a part of, that group, were addressed as Telugus. This identity persists even today, more than a century after the initial formation of the Burmese diaspora. My family name, Telugu, serves as a constant reminder of our Indian Burmese heritage. Many interviews that I have conducted as part of the research shared valuable accounts passed on from their fathers. My grandfather always shared this bit of story of how leaving Burma was imperative. So they took the roads, walking the border instead of waiting for their turn to board the ships. The journey was tormenting. They lost their loved ones along the way, had no choice but to leave the sick behind. And some even resorted to tying children to trees, hoping they might be saved by passerby. And these are the kind of dilapidated living conditions of the Indian Burmese who have repatriated to India. The majority of them still live in these kind of houses that were converted into colonies, the camps that were converted into colonies. The political upheaval in Burma led to the chaotic repatriation and traumatized the lives of migrants. Majority found themselves homeless and penniless. Displaced from their homes, repatriates were forced to dwell in camps with inadequate facilities. They endured prolonged struggles with the government for land rights, educational opportunities, and loans to establish business. This person that you see over here, I had a chance to meet him and interview him. So he says the government has provided him a loan to buy a cycle and not to buy a sewing machine. So he goes on to the cycle from door to door, requesting people for needle and thread so he can help them sewing. And this is the kind of a condition that most Indian Burmese live in India today. For Burma repatriates, home represents a physical connection to the land that they return to and a deep emotional tie to the land they were forced to leave behind. Unfortunately, home is now elsewhere for those repatriates, and their true sense of belonging remains rooted in Burma. Many who repatriated from Burma claim that although they were aware of India and its culture through their parents, they had only visited the country once the repatriation occurred. While in Burma, they enjoyed all the rights. Coming back to India, they lost everything, including a place to live, their identity, their citizenship. They have a political citizenship, but they have no civil citizenship. The neighbors have tried addressing these people, asking their caste and class background, even before offering them a glass of water. In the context of the socio-political existence, the sovereign power in the homeland acts as an outside force that dehumanizes the repatriates, victimizing them and making them powerless. Therefore, those confined within these encampments have no choice but to seek assistance from the external political authorities. In a sense, political power overrides the rights of these people, relegating them to a state of animalization or reducing them to mere zoe, as described by Agamben in his discourse on the victimization of refugees and repatriates. These narratives depicting the turbulent times of 1947 and 1962 highlight their relevance and significance in contemporary times. Repatriate tales and refugee narratives delve into individual emotions rather than mere statistics, exploring the depths of human psyche instead of focusing solely on politics. The ethical considerations, which should have been a fundamental element during the partition, have been deliberately overlooked. Partition narratives and repatriate accounts serve as moving reminders of the significance of discussing trauma, not only in the context of partition and repatriation in the history, but also in broader global situations in contemporary times. They're relevant in the recent Israel war against Hamas, killing thousands and displacing hundreds of families. These narratives are relevant when we consider the evacuation of thousands of scouts from the World Scout Jamboree in South Korea due to environmental reasons. They're relevant when we contemplate the plight of Syrian refugees. They are relevant when we address the humanitarian crisis in the Central African Republic. And they are relevant when 1.1 million stateless Rohingyas flee ongoing violence in Myanmar. These accounts vividly illustrate the universal issues within our society, regardless of the era we live in. They shed light in the enduring presence of discrimination, hatred, and inequality, emphasizing how we continue to suffocate in the fog of bigotry. In conclusion, migration, a fundamental aspect of mobility humanities, allows us to perceive displacement not just as a geopolitical shift, but also a profoundly human experience. Certainly, mobility humanities offers a comprehensive perspective on displacement, cultivating a society that is well-informed, empathetic, and compassionate towards the challenges displaced individuals and communities face. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very enlightening talk, which gives rise to a deep reflection on the political, moral, and psychological effect of the forced migration and displacement. So we have exactly 80 minutes for Q&A session. If you participate online, you can use the hand raise function for question. So we are going to the floor for questions.
Yes, thank you so much for your very vivid and touching account of the events, of the tragic events, and of the literature that portray them. Towards the very end of your presentation, you made a clause for understanding migration and also displacement as something very human and something that is well, that is needs perhaps even to be counted as the rule rather than the exception of well, human life on Earth. I wonder, however, whether migration literature, as you depicted it, as delving on trauma, as insisting on experiences of violence, on basically all the well, bloodshed that is attached to it, is a way of well, towards normalizing migration in this sense. So isn't it about the opposite of it, of making this precisely as a sort of violent exception? So what about the good stories?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we've been talking about too much of good, so I thought better we have a contradiction to what we have been talking about. So migration is always about fantasy. To migrate to a different place is romanticizing the new world, new land. It's a choice-based kind of a migration. If you look at all the diasporic writers who have migrated, they talk about nostalgia, they talk about adaptation, they talk about assimilation. At the same time, they also talk about the chances of being in a new world. And are these writers willing to go back to their land? Are these writers willing to talk about India? Are these people willing to accept the facts that they are in India, but to romanticize what is there in the diaspora? No. So at the other side of the romanticization is the traumatization that people refuse to look at. And yes, I have done a lot of work in looking at diaspora from a colorful perspective, and my research in PhD was also based on it. But then when you get into the tip of migration, you find that there is pain, there is agony, and that is mostly felt by the people who were uprooted forcibly and not on a choice-based migration. So I find that a voluntary migration is very different from an involuntary migration. So I hope I have answered your question. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You seem to be a little skeptical about it.
So next question, okay.
Thank you for the really nice presentation. I had actually a question about the, I mean, I found the picture you show really aesthetical also, in a sense. I think they are also in your slide picture that are actually aesthetical in terms that they are romanticizing also those really difficult experience. And I was thinking maybe we could talk a bit more about
all the pictures, or is there any specific picture that you're referring to?
Well, that with the young boy, for instance, with the refugee camp. So I think there is a really strong quality.
This is a sense of loss that I would want to associate with the boy who was sitting on the wall, right? Is that the picture that you're talking about? It's a sense of a loss that I would like to associate with losing family, losing home, losing identity. Imagine today someone walks into the room and say that you do not belong to this place anymore. Pack your bags. And when you say pack your bags, not to take in everything that belongs to you, except whatever you're wearing, and a couple of or a pair of clothes is what you take. And then your identity is changed completely. Today, you have, suppose, let's say I'm an Indian today, tomorrow I become a Korean. So how do I relate to that kind of a sudden shift? The shift was sudden and it was horrific. with the massacres, with the killings. So I associate these kind of pictures with a sense of loss and, yeah, pain.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, my question was about
Mm.
how do you make a connection between the text that you're actually
Okay,
looking
my
at?
text. No, I'm sorry. I didn't get you
those
correctly.
picture,
No. These pictures, let me be very frank. I was telling many people in the conference today that this presentation was made last night. So everyone was using a PowerPoint. So I thought, why should not I also use a PowerPoint? So I made and I quickly gathered some pictures. And these were pictures which were taken by during the partition. These were the real-time events that were clicked. So talking about partition, I tried to bring in a picture that represented partition and the what do we call the displacement? Yes, nothing related to the story that I have said.
Okay, but so I found it was interesting to see how also aesthetics is also a way to take distance and to don't feel responsible also for those situations.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you for the answer. So,
thank you very much, Sireesha. It's terrific. I'm going to pose a question that I've been asking myself for the last 3 years, and this is in relation to a project that I've been involved in with colleagues in Colombia and in Cuba. Colombia is one of the countries with internal forced displacement with one of the highest figures. It's reached the highest, I think it was in 2016. So by 2022, yes, that's last year, there were roughly 9 million people displaced internally within Colombia, and that's excluding the Venezuelans crossing the country. Some of them stayed in Colombia, some of them carried on to Central America in search of the US, some of them went south. And we've been working with communities from informal settlements in Colombia and in Cuba, in Cali, in the case of Colombia, and in Havana in Cuba. And so part of the research that we've done is to do with experimenting with a variety of different methods, to do with capturing different aspects of, yes, it's 9 million people. And in your slides at the beginning, we had these staggering figures, hundreds of millions of people displaced. And I think you're absolutely right in saying, it's a different thing when we move by choice than when we're forced to move, completely different circumstances. And in this case, so the communities that we've been working with in Cali in particular, they had no choice. They were displaced. They ended up in the city because of violence, because of perceiving the city as a safe haven, sort of as a site of opportunities and so on and so forth. At the same time, to me, an important part of the discovery is that, yes, it is important to get a sense of the trend nationally, locally, within cities, the difference between rural and urban migration. But it's equally important to actually capture those personal stories. And so the methods that we use to do that need to change and adjust. And to do that, we actually commission artists so that they would actually enter into conversation in a process of, I wouldn't call it co-creation as such, because those stories do not need to be co-created. They're already powerful. So it's about capturing them and making sure that they speak to the figures. And so the question is, sorry, just very long, but so the question is, could you tell us about, I guess it's a bit of a methodological reflection. How do we bridge the two? To what extent can we and should we bridge the hundreds of millions with a personal story? Which I guess Claire's question is probably.
I think I can refer to one of the archive that's been developed on partition. It's called Partition Archive 1947. It's available online. If you look at that archive, that was a voluntary kind of some kind of attempt that a group of scholars have started, building upon the narratives, the oral tales that they could collect from the people who were a part of the partition. So that is one method. And if you look at that entire archive, it's all the tales of those who have experienced partition. So you find that there is a huge difference in a Hindu being displaced and a Muslim being displaced, and how a Sikh person is caught in between, the Sikh communities who are caught in between, neither being a Hindu nor Muslim. And if you look into their oral narratives, you get to understand how a common person was caught in the political drama of partition. And this is one method that they have, I think they started in 2009, and you have hundreds and thousands of tales that were recorded by the people who have participated personally in narrating their tales. And yes, one platform that you could actually bring them together is through collection of oral tales. And of course, if you can access these people around. Yes.
Yeah, thank you also, Sireesha. That was a really beautiful and evocative presentation. My question leads on from Carlos's also on method. And I guess one of the really interesting things that we've all been thinking about over the last couple of days is how mobility humanities gives us new ways of perceiving our objects of analysis. And so in that regard, I'm really interested in hearing about from you about the relationship between kind of literature and literary accounts, given that I know that lots of your past work has been in that space, and first-hand interviews, and how these different accounts kind of imprint and force upon you in different ways. And it feels like that's actually a really nice bridge between the kind of social science and the kind of the literary studies, which was one of the divides that was talking about yesterday. So yeah, a reflection on that.
Frankly, it was very difficult. On one hand, I have the fictional narratives, while I have to bridge them with the real events of the repatriate tales. So these interviews were conducted by me. I had to, I visited some of the camps for a research project of mine and try to collect the experiences that these people had while being displaced. And hearing to them speak is like tremendously painful. And when you connect them to the writings, so I try to look for material, literary material that is available on Burmese repatriate narratives, except the two people that I've quoted today, Amitav Ghosh. And Amitav Ghosh has also written about Burmese repatriates in two of his books. And then Hugh Tinker, except those two, there is no mention of the Burmese repatriation. So where do I get the sources? The only way that I had was to visit these places, collect. And the oral narratives were, again, had to go through the ethical process of getting permissions and then recording them, putting them up in archive, and then trying to correlate to the partition narratives that the partition archive has provided, and to keep them, bridge them together with the oral tales and connect them to the writings that most of the writers have brought forth, to see there is a kind of a comparison or similarity perspectives that I can take up for my research. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.